All right, so this is going to be an extended video study guide. I'm hoping that by doing this, this will help you to understand the themes and concepts that I'm looking for in the test, the Unit 3 test. I've had several students who have asked that maybe we move or we do something similar to what we did in 101, and I'm hoping that this will be able to take care of that for you. Okay, so this will be an extended video, but if you take the opportunity to watch it, you should be able to gain the concepts that I'm looking for and the significance as to why this is important. Okay, so just to start off, I'm going to run through some hypothetical test questions that you may see on the test, and then from that I'm going to give you maybe some of the ideas and themes that I'm looking for on those tests that you should have gained from the reading or gleaned from some of the supplemental reading that we've been doing. My hope is that as you take the test, you're able to take some of that information, put it into the test, into the exam, and then also be able to provide the significance, why it's important, why we are learning about some of these things. So first, one of the things that I think is important to understand is the impact of religion and science together. We've talked about some of this term, and I think that I did a really bad job of trying to place this in historical context, and so I apologize about that with the question. It seems like everybody who answered that discussion question that week really spent a lot of time on discussing whether religion and science can coexist today. And although I think that's an interesting idea and an interesting argument, what I'm looking for is really this historical context behind it, and from the reading, if you could see that those two could coexist. Okay, so what I'm looking for is maybe some ways that science impacted religion. Okay, one of the ways that I think that it did that was through it challenged Christianity. Science challenged Christianity. We talked about this in the video for that week, is that science did challenge Christianity through Darwinism, some of these ideas that came out that really made Christians think, is Christianity real? Am I following this antiquated idea? Is that something that I shouldn't be following? And so I'm hoping that you're seeing that science challenged Christianity. One way that it did that was through intellectual skepticism. And intellectual skepticism really is brought about by Strauss and his idea of, is the Bible historical? Okay, that I think is one way that science challenged Christianity. This idea of, is the Bible historical? Are there points in history that we can see that relate to what the Bible says? And so I hope that you were able to see that. And if I were writing a test question, I would definitely bring up intellectual skepticism, challenging Christianity, and Strauss as being a philosopher who did that. Okay. Another way is morality. Morality is a way that we can see, and there's definitely two, I think. Nietzsche is one who says that Christianity glorifies weakness, not strength. And he says that we should be working towards being stronger people, but that the Bible, or Christianity rather, pushes weakness. It glorifies weakness. It says that we should be humble. It says that we should bow down to this creator. And so that is something that I think is difficult for Christians who want to be intellectuals to see, am I doing this correctly? And is this something that I'm working towards? Is morality really an issue for me? Freud is another one that really questions Christianity, challenges Christianity, and I think that those are two philosophers that, if you're answering a question, that I would bring up. Nietzsche and Freud, glorifying weakness, and morality, or rather questioning morality within Christianity. Okay. Another one is positivism, which is Comte. He gives 3 stages of learning, or as we continue to build upon one another. And he says that religion is that base stage, that we look to something to give us ideas of greater importance. And as we move through these ideas, the 3rd stage is really we're coming to a realization that we don't need religion. We can move on through our own understanding and our own knowledge and learning. That's also questioning Christianity. And this really is going to give rise to intellectuals in another way as we continue on into the 20th century. So if I was answering a question, I would definitely talk about all of these 3, or depending on what the question asks, a couple of these. So I would think that challenging Christianity is really the major thing that's going on here with science and philosophy at the time. Science is challenging Christianity through an intellectual skepticism, morality, positivism, and then if there are other things that you can bring in with the book, I would suggest doing that. I would definitely think that using maybe some of the philosophers that you've read, maybe some of the important pieces, bring that in. What is it doing? It is undermining the church, something that we have seen throughout time, throughout 101, and now partly throughout 102, is this idea of Christianity really pushing ideas of morality, maybe squashing intellectualism, really keeping people at a level which didn't provide revolution. Okay, and that, I would say, that's really what it's trying to do, and what the significance would be is that religion is keeping people maybe in these underclasses or in a hierarchy, and that's what I would say the significance is that as people start to look through science and rely on their own knowledge, that then they are really going to become vessels of revolution and start to push new ideas, which the Catholic Church doesn't want, most nation states don't want. They don't want their people to be thinkers. They want them to fit within the hierarchy and do their jobs. That's what they want. Okay, that's my idea. If you have a different idea of significance, please bring it up. But what I want is to find the significance, and I would definitely put these points that I've just talked about into context, and then provide the significance that you see. Maybe there's a different significance that you see, and maybe you see that religion was able to overcome this scientific revolution, and that there is no problem, that they can coexist together. I know that some of you said that in your discussion posts a few weeks ago, and so make your argument, and as long as you're using evidence from the book or the readings, I'm not going to grade you down on that. I'm not specifically looking for significance. I want you to make the argument, is really my thought, is that I would like you to think critically about this and then make an argument that's sound. All right, so if I was going in, another question, I would be remiss if I did not talk about racial theory. We haven't really talked about this too much. I think I brought it up a couple of times, but really this chapter does a pretty good job, or this unit does a pretty good job of talking about racial theorists and the idea of race superiority and racism. Okay, now that is a difficult topic that I know that we're still having an argument today on, and so I hope that as you read this week, or as you read in the weeks prior, especially chapter 24, that you were able to gain some of that knowledge and see racism for itself. So I hope that you can do that as we work through some of these things. What I would suggest is understanding racial theorists in the 19th century. Where racism began, really racism has been an issue throughout time, but we're going to get this explosion in the 19th century because of European views on Islam, First, they believe that Islam creates backwards ideas. It treats women poorly. It's got backward ideas on women, and it condones slavery. Okay, so Europeans start to think that people who live in the Middle East are below them in the superior hierarchy, due to they believe that they're backwards and Europeans are ahead of the game. Okay, although we've seen that Europeans treat Jewish people very poorly, and that is another way that, or another instance that gives rise to racism in the 20th century. Okay, nationalism is another way that it does this. Nationalism helps create racism because it brings people together and really puts this idea of nation states being better than other nation states. And so hopefully as you see that, you can see that that's a way that racism could be continued to be pushed during this time. And I think that you've seen that. I think that we spent a lot of time on nation states and nationalism. It's one of the reasons that I do that is because as it leads up to the 20th century, it makes a turn into not nation states being upset with other nation states, but rather nation states saying, well, we're better because we're more white than another nation state. Okay, so let's get into some ways of classifying. Classifications came out by skin color, and language and civilization. So there would be stages of civilization. If you were a civilized group of people, you were at the top, and then it would break down from there. But these ideas of civilized people really came out of European thought. So Europeans were obviously at the top, and people in Africa were at the bottom. People in Native American cultures were at the bottom, even though those cultures now, as we've looked at them, could potentially be civilized cultures within their own right. And so this is a way that Europeans continued to push, was the classification of skin color, language, and civilizations. Okay, you get the Romantic period writers who start to classify people as races, different cultures as races, and this is within Europe as well. So you get differing cultures or different cultures within Europe who are being classified as different races, regardless of skin color. Okay, this is one of the things that I think is interesting, and there's a book, the Color Line by Reynolds and Lake, and I can't think of their first name, Marilyn Reynolds, I think it is, and Lake, that do a really good job of really breaking down the color line throughout time, that I obviously have not asked you to read. This would be into maybe a 300 or 400 level course that if we were talking about racism in general, but really this idea of whiteness not being white. Okay, you get varying degrees, with the Irish usually being at the bottom of that white hierarchy, and Europeans, namely French, British, being at the top. Okay, so that's another way that racism continued to persist within the 20th century, okay, or the 19th century. Lastly, radical science. Radical science led to a hierarchy of superiority. This is another thing that Reynolds and Lake say in their book, is really this idea of pseudoscience being able to say, well, here is are the different races and how we see them. Now, as you've already seen, there's an explosion of scientific thought during this time period, and scientific thought, intellectuals are looking at this as the end-all be-all. So if you're a scientist studying biology of different races, you're going to, obviously, your ideas are going to matter. Here's what I think is interesting, and this is just an aside for a moment, is this idea that conservatives today really push this idea of science being pseudoscience as well. And unfortunately, I think as liberals, you can also look at science being the end-all be-all, but science changes over time. And I hate to say that, because I think that at the time this was a pseudoscience, and we've now disproven this pseudoscience to be that there are no races. We're all a human race, and our DNA is the same. And so, or our genes are all the same. And so it just seems like that's not really the way that it is, and that things can change. And so potentially maybe things that we're saying today could change in the next 15, 20, 100 years. Okay, so if I'm talking about racism right now and answering a question on racism, I would definitely bring up the classification of race due to language, civilization, and skin color. I would bring up that the Romantics writers during the Romantic period classified people into races due to their skin color or cultures, and that racism science or race sciences really started this superiority hierarchy, okay, of superior or inferior peoples. But that really comes out of these differing views of anti-Semitism and anti-Islam views of people being backwards and not doing things that Europeans believed were civilized. Okay, this is going to continue to progress throughout time, and we get to the KKK in the United States. We get to apartheid in South Africa. I mean, this is a massive issue that's going to continue, and the significance of this really is setting the stage for these other things. Okay, that's what I would suggest is happening, is that you get all of this nationalism, European views on race that lead to people being affected all over the world with these racist ideas. Okay. There might be something else, and if you have a differing view, obviously, of the significance of racial theorists and racism in the 19th century, please bring it up and make your argument. I would love to hear it. Okay. Let's say there's a third question talking about imperialism. We've spent some time on imperialism in the last couple of weeks, and I think imperialism is fascinating. Okay, I have a hard time saying that imperialism is bad, but knowing the history of imperialism, I know that imperialism is bad, and so I'm very conflicted when talking about imperialism and where we go from here. And I think that you all made some great arguments, whether you thought it was good or bad, using information from the text. And so what I would like you to do in this question is be able to answer the question fully, providing information from the text and make an argument. Really, there are several different reasons for the rise of Western imperialism. Okay, I'm going to give you several of them. I think the question asks for two. Productive capacity, okay? Military superiority, technology, and free trade are the four reasons really giving rise to Western imperialism, okay? You get Europeans have this productive capacity that they can go out and they can invade. They need these what would be exports, but they need to get them more cheaply, and so they have the productive capacity to get out there and do that due to the Industrial Revolution. Military superiority. These countries, Western imperialists, have massive militaries, as we've already seen, and so it doesn't take a lot for them to go into these countries and take over. Okay, technology. Due to the Industrial Revolution and the Second Industrial Revolution, you get technology that these other countries don't have, and so when imperialist countries roll in, they're able to take over. Just with the sole fact that they have the technology to be able to do that. Lastly, free trade. Free trade, with the trade going back and forth and really nobody stopping it, you're getting a lot of Western influence into these countries. And we talked about this a couple weeks ago, but I think that that's important to lay out, that free trade here, this is a negative aspect of free trade, is that these mixing of cultures, if you don't want that to happen, and generally what happens is that the more advanced culture is going to come in and take over. Okay, and that happens in a lot of places. So those would be several reasons for the rise of Western imperialism. What I would be looking for is the context around that. I've given you some of the context of how that happens or how it came about. Okay, if we're looking at some of the reasons that Western imperialism was able to continue to progress, we've talked about some of these things as well over the last couple of weeks. Really, it's going to continue because you have merchants and markets, or an emerging market for merchants and manufacturers. They've got this new market that they can tap with new employees or laborers that can work in their factories. They've got the product that's already there. Usually it's in abundance because imperialist countries have used their resources in their country. They can go out and get these, and they can do it much cheaper. Okay, they're looking to sell. These merchants and manufacturers are looking to sell goods in these areas, and that keeps a market going. Okay. You get Christian missionaries who are looking to Christianize the world. That brings imperialist values to these other countries and emerging markets. Okay, scientists saw these new markets as new areas of research. They had researched a lot of, for instance, if you're talking about racial theorists, now they can go into these countries and they can start to do studies that they weren't able to do before, and they can see things that they hadn't seen because they weren't living in these countries. But they're able to do that, and scientists now are spending more money in these countries, which obviously result in more manufacturers and marketers and merchants. Okay, military looking for a rise in professional development. The military would go in, they could take over and continue to push so that they could rise within their own ranks. This really is something that I don't necessarily see a lot, but I know that according to other scholars it did happen, and I do think that it is if you want to write on this piece, it is one way or a factor that Western imperialism was able to progress. Okay. Lastly, and this one I think is probably one of the most important, is non-Westerners helping imperialist countries. Okay, you get non-Westerners who see that maybe this is a way that they can pull themselves out of poverty, and so they begin helping Western imperialist countries and really helping out in ways that is going to undermine their country and their culture later on. Maybe they don't know that, maybe they do. However, what they're going to do is they're going to become a bridge between the two cultures, and they're going to be able to make some money. A lot of these people became very wealthy as being go-betweens. Okay, those would be the one way, or several ways, or the factors that led to progressed or helped progress imperialism. Okay, I would definitely pick out 2 or 3 of those that you're going to become very acquainted with, that you're going to be able to speak to in an exam. Okay, and give some sort of significance as why this is significant. In my mind, the significance of this would be the importance of imperialism, whether good or bad, and you make the argument what you think, depending on what you see the evidence is. Okay, and like I said, I'm conflicted, but I'm a historian, and that's what I should be. I shouldn't be able to argue one side over the other. It should be that I'm giving you both sides, and then you're able to take that away and say, well, this is what I believe. Okay. Lastly, we just talked about dictators in European dictators. Okay, and I want to make sure that you can answer a question on dictators that would suffice what I'm looking for. Really, I would, if I'm answering a question on dictators, I would definitely bring up the League of Nations and this idea of the war guilt clause leading Germany to not be happy, and it leads to distrust. It also leads to Russia, Britain, and France really cementing a relationship. But then you get the rise of all these dictators, and they are all over Europe at the time. We get several big ones: Stalin, Hitler, Mussolini. Those would be the 3 big ones. And how do we get to where they're taking over? That's going to be several different factors. Mass communication, which we talked about last week as well. Mass communication is going to lead to more people understanding what the dictator wants, or what their leader wants, what their leader is looking for, and it also allows the dictator or the person in power to be able to frame their propaganda. Okay, they can lead it in a direction. We see that in the news media today, depending on what side you're on. If you are a conservative, then you think that CNN, MSNBC, some of these websites or news organizations, media sites, are framing things in a liberal bias. If you are on the liberal side, you're looking at Fox News as framing it in a conservative lens as well. Okay, that's exactly what's going on with this mass communication. You have a police force that is more organized than it has been up to this point under that dictator, okay, under that ruler. You have party discipline. Now, I talked about this last week in my video last week about party discipline and how we see that a lot today, that if you're a Republican, it doesn't matter what the Republicans say, you are following it. And that's exactly what's going on. If you're a Democrat, you are following it to the T because you're a Democrat. That's the key here, and that is party discipline. That's exactly what is going on, which gives rise to Stalin, Mussolini, and Hitler. Okay, in my mind, you could potentially throw Churchill in, if depending on where you lie on either side. You could potentially put an American president in as a dictator if you could make that argument. Lastly, I'm only saying that because I'm sitting here thinking that honestly there's a lot of people who believe that as well, that American presidents have so much control. I don't personally believe that, but and I don't think that they acted the way that Hitler, Mussolini, and Stalin did. But yeah, you never know. I mean, people can make arguments and use the information that they glean to fit their narrative, and so maybe you can do that. Okay. Lastly, physical force. Physical force. We had not seen physical force like this up to this point, which is why you get dictators. We'd seen dictators like this before, but really they've been few and far between, and never this much power. Maybe Genghis Khan, but that'd take us back to 101, which some of you didn't take, at least not with me. And so physical force due to the Second Industrial Revolution really leads us to a much stronger dictator. Okay, we see this specifically with newer dictatorships today. When you get to Saddam Hussein, who is killing his own people, or Gaddafi, some of these guys as well, it's the physical force that they can take over, and you cannot speak out against them. Okay, with all of these factors, that continues to make dictatorships stronger in the 20th century. And so really, in my mind, the significance of this would be that dictators are becoming stronger. This is going to lead to World War II because you get all of these powers, these dictators who are so strong that nobody can back down. They've all got this bravado that they're going to continue to fight one another. So I would suggest that leads to World War II and where we're leading to now. At this point, we haven't talked about World War II yet, and so in my mind, you don't need to really give me any information on World War II. But the lead up to it is where I would suggest that this goes to. I have gone way over. I'm at 28 minutes, and so I hope that this was helpful to you, that you can now make an outline of the questions that you are going to be able to answer, and in using this video, you could lay out what some of the factors are that give rise to these different questions, and then the significance to it as well. I realize this isn't a lecture, so you weren't able to ask any questions. I've had somebody suggest maybe a live lecture. I don't have a problem with that. I've thought about maybe Instagram. I don't have a Facebook, so that wouldn't work. But I could also do YouTube Live, I suppose, if that's something that you're interested in. And hopefully we'll see some of your ideas this week. Come back and let me know if that's something you'd be interested in. Good luck on the test this week. If you have any questions prior, let me know. It closes Sunday at 11:59. If you don't get in before then, it will close. You've got 90 minutes. I would suggest giving yourself at least that 90 minutes and potentially a couple hours to maybe study before that so that you have the answers. Do take some time to read over the questions or to read over the chapter, kind of look through your notes and the study guide. But you can use your book and notes on this test as usual. And I will be grading a little bit harder than the last test due to this video and a few of the other, due to being able to read the book and you're having your notes. So have a good week, and we'll see you next time.